Welcome in to another episode of my Dynasty Fantasy Football YouTube. Today I'm looking at some Dynasty breakouts. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's go. Our first breakout, Jaylen Waddle. So, what is a breakout? A breakout is a player I think could take another step from what they've done in their career. And Jaylen Waddle's had a pretty good career. As a rookie in 2021, he had 104 catches, 1,015 yards, 6 touchdowns on 140 targets, 6.5 catches, and 63.4 yards a game, 15.4 PPR points per game. That's actually his best season. And then in 2022, very different player, 75 catches, 1,356 yards. So almost 30 less catches, but almost 350 more yards. Very strange. 8 touchdowns, 117 targets, 4.4 catches, and 79.8 yards per game. 15.2 PPR points per game. So very similar fantasy production in a completely different way. And then last year, 72 catches, 1,014 yards, 4 touchdowns, 104 targets, 5.1 catches, and 72.4 yards a game, 14.2 PPR points per game. Now, why do I think Jaylen Waddle could break out? Couple things. Some bad injury luck last year. A lot of the advanced metrics favor him. He got a contract extension, could put it all together this year. And additionally, I feel like a little bit of touchdown regression. He's just been missing it the last few years by a bit. In 2021, he had the volume, but not the efficiency before Mike McDaniel and Tyreek Hill appeared. In 2022, he had the efficiency, but not the volume. Then in 2023, he started to get the volume a little bit more, but there were some issues because he left multiple games early. He missed time during games due to injuries. I think fantasy managers were very frustrated with Jaylen Waddle last year. But let's take a look at a few things. He had a 27.5% target rate in 2023. So when he was on the field, he was targeted 27.5% of the time, 10th among wide receivers. It's elite. He had 2.68 yards per route run, 8th among wide receivers. Plus 69.7 EPA, 9th among wide receivers. He also had very good advanced stats in 2022. This is an elite player. The only reason we don't think of him as an elite player is because he's next to Tyreek Hill, who is, it's not fair to compare someone to Tyreek Hill. Jaylen Waddle is currently healthy, not injured. It's not like he was injured and now he's still injured and worry about that. There's no current injury. He is healthy right now. The Dolphins gave him a 3-year, $84.75 million extension, over $28 million a year in new money. It shows that the Dolphins see him as elite. I'm all in on targeting Waddle this year, and I do think you're going to get paid back for, good production. And I still think people don't see him that way. They're still scared. So I definitely think this is a breakout player that could take a whole nother step, just 25 years old this year. Next up, Jayden Daniels. So, of course, we know that Daniels doesn't have any past NFL stats, but rushing quarterbacks are king in fantasy. And Daniels ran a lot in college, especially in his 2 years at LSU. In 2022, he had great completion percentage, 68.6% completion, 2,913 yards. That's okay. 7.5 yards per attempt, 17 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, but he had 186 carries, 885 yards, and 11 touchdowns on the ground. The rushing production is very critical. Then in 2023, it all came together. 72.2% completion, 3,812 yards, 11.7 yards per attempt, 40 touchdowns and 4 interceptions, and 135 carries, 1,134 yards, and 10 touchdowns. So why do I think Jayden Daniels will break out as a rookie? The rushing ability. Quarterbacks who run don't even have to be good passers to be good for fantasy. Looking at Daniels' 2022 and 2023 performances, we obviously cannot expect this. We can't expect this. No quarterback will ever have 11.7 yards per attempt in the NFL. That's not going to happen. But even Daniels' 2022 performance, these types of numbers, with 885 rushing yards and 11 touchdowns or anywhere near it, would make him a solid quarterback one. In 2023, every single quarterback with more than 500 rushing yards averaged a minimum of 18.4 fantasy points per game and 6-point passing touchdown scoring. Even Justin Fields finished as the quarterback 13 in fantasy points per game, and he was not good. He was not good for real life. So bad that he, is not currently a starter right now. In fact, every single quarterback in the last 5 years who even put up 500 rushing yards, we're not talking about 800, 500, exceeded 18 fantasy points per game in 6-point passing touchdown scoring. Now, we have to hear two different things that I'm saying. There's no guarantee that Daniels is good for real life. That's not guaranteed. I want to caution people. When I'm calling for this breakout, this is a fantasy football breakout. I think he will be someone that will help you win a fantasy championship this year, just like Justin Fields did at times in the last 3 years. But I want to caution people about falling into the Justin Fields trap, where the fantasy points blinded us and raised his value too high. Because of the way rushing quarterbacks score, it's at other positions, right? A running back who scores a lot of fantasy points is probably at least decent in real life. Say a wide receiver who scores a lot of fantasy points is definitely good. Same with the tight end. But at quarterback, it doesn't necessarily work that way. The fantasy points will be there. They will be there this year. I'm raising Jayden Daniels in my redraft rankings, but I caution people in Dynasty, if the real life success is not there to complement the fantasy points. Now, if you like my YouTube content, you should sign up for the Patreon. You get my rankings, access to the Discord, and the ability to ask in advance questions for the YouTube videos. Tiers begin at just $6 a month. And you can also get your roster reviewed as part of a Patreon video roster review, which are only available for patrons. I really appreciate everyone who signed up and any new patrons who join. And once again, this channel will cover Dynasty Fantasy Football. It will not cover redraft. It will not cover start sit. Those will be covered on the Patreon only. So if you want to hear my thoughts about that, especially start sit, sign up for the Patreon. With that said, and I feel like I don't mention this anymore. The link is at the top right corner. You can click on it, and it's also in the comments, the video description below. But with that said, let's jump into our next player, Pat Freiermuth. Now, Pat Freiermuth has had an interesting career thus far for a tight end. In 2021, as a rookie, 60 catches, 497 yards, 7 touchdowns on 79 targets, 3.8 catches and 31.1 yards a game, 9.5 PPR points per game. Pretty good. Then in 2022, he stepped forward a little bit. 63 catches, 732 yards, 2 touchdowns, 98 targets, 3.9 catches, and 45.8 yards a game, 9.9 PPR points per game. He had a little bit more volume, but the key thing was an increase in yardage. Touchdown regression is coming, you would think, at just 2 touchdowns. Problem is, everything kind of went wrong in 2023. 32 catches, 308 yards, 2 touchdowns, 47 targets, 2.7 catches, and 25.7 yards per game, 6.4 PPR points per game. There were a lot of issues. But I do think this is the year for a Pat Freiermuth breakout. Why? Tight ends break out later in their careers. He had a solid career trajectory before the 2023 down season. There's a lack of offensive weapons on the Steelers. And we're talking about a Freiermuth contract extension, which seems like it might be in the works. Freiermuth is only 25 years old and turns 26 in October. Tight ends are not wide receivers. Tight ends usually break out later in their careers. 25, 26 years old is a common, very, very common breakout age for tight ends. I mean, you see Evan Ingram, best seasons are at 28 and 29. And really much better than anything he did before that. David Njoku, 26, 27 years old, breaking out. It happens all the time. In 2022, Freiermuth had the 5th most targets among tight ends with 98. He had 849 air yards in 2022, 4th among tight ends. So just recently, he was earning targets and air yards, which are measures of success for a tight end. Really what happened is that he was sucked down into the Kenny Pickett vortex, the disastrous vortex in 2023, where everything went wrong. And Freiermuth struggled with some injuries last year. But we know that he can earn targets as he did in his first 2 seasons. I don't think he forgot how to play football. Now, the Steelers have no reliable wide receivers outside of George Pickens. I mean, Roman Wilson hasn't been doing anything. And then the other guys are Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin. Typically, tight ends who matter are the first or second target earner on their team. And we know that Freiermuth has earned targets in the past and could be in a position to be the second target after George Pickens. Offensive coordinator Arthur Smith, then the head coach of the Falcons, gave 174 targets to tight ends in 2023. We know that tight ends will be used in this offense. The breakout, what it's going to hinge on is how much of it goes Pat Freiermuth's way. I have a feeling that Pat Freiermuth is more of the type of tight end that Arthur Smith likes, because Pat Freiermuth is more of a every down tight end, more of a blocker, less of just a glorified wide receiver, which is what Kyle Pitts was. So I think that Pat Freiermuth will play more, but with Arthur Smith, you never know. So the usage for tight ends will be there. We just have to hope it goes his way. And then, of course, a contract extension would add to my confidence in Pat Freiermuth. But overall, I do think there's a lot of indicators saying that Pat Freiermuth will be a breakout candidate this year. And he hasn't been too highly priced, although he is starting to get some camp buzz. So, maybe the time to buy was in the past. But if you have him, I would feel pretty good about your shares. Now, we're going to close out the video with some Patreon questions. I have 3 of those. So let's jump into it. Are you buying into the buzz that players like Jameson Williams and Rashad Bateman are gaining? So there does come a point with a player in their career that buzz doesn't matter anymore. I don't believe it. Bateman is past that point. They can say whatever they want about Bateman. I'm going to need to see Bateman score not 1 week, but probably many weeks of scoring fantasy points to believe that Rashad Bateman is good. So we're past that with him. Jameson Williams, I do kind of believe it to a degree, but it's hard in that offense. There's no role there. With Amon-Ra, Gibbs, and Laporta all healthy, there is no way that Jameson Williams can be a fantasy relevant receiver. It's not possible. So just because he looks good and might help them for real life, the Lions, doesn't mean that he'll help in fantasy. Who's one player you're currently high on, but envision a scenario where you've completely soured on him by the end of 2024? I mean, Drake London has to deliver. He must deliver fantasy points. Otherwise, his value is going to go way down. You usually don't get 3 chances. Kyle Pitts on the same team is also on his last chance. If Kyle Pitts does not deliver, I'm not saying that Drake London and Kyle Pitts will be worthless, but they will be worth a lot less. This is their last chance in a lot of people's minds. Anthony Richardson, I love him. I mean, I really like him. But if he has another stop and start season loaded with injuries or issues, he's not going to hold his dynasty value. And then lastly, Nico Collins. I think he's the clear wide receiver 1 on the Texans, but if that's just incorrect, then he's not going to hold his value. He's going to be a lot lower if Stephon Diggs steps up, or if Tank Dell is actually the one. Nico Collins would lose some value in that case. Lastly, what are your career ceiling and floor projections for Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, and Rome Odunze? Career ceiling and floor is tough to project. I mean, I think all 3 of these wide receivers have the ceiling of being a Hall of Fame type wide receiver. As for floor, I can't see any of them being a bust. I mean, yeah. Wide receivers picked in the top 10 with good analytical profiles, not overdrafted speedsters, basically don't bust. The last one who flopped entirely was Kevin White. It really doesn't happen. The other failures, like Sammy Watkins, Corey Davis, or Mike Williams, those are the worst in the top 10. Even they delivered fantasy points in their long NFL careers. So generally rare for a pick this high to bust entirely. If you like the video, make sure to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. As always, the best way to support the channel is to subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notifications bell so you can be notified about all my exciting content as it drops. Of course, if you want my best fantasy football advice, it's available on the Patreon. Dynasty, redraft, start sit, and more. Every sign up helps support my independent content. But once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all later.